Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we will share Skinwalker horror stories. First story, The Wolf at Skinwalker Ranch. My wife and I were sitting on the front porch after a long day of moving furniture and boxes into our new house. We were tired, red-faced, and sweating after sharing the burden between the two of us. The sun was setting on the horizon as we sipped our warm beers and looked out over the landscape of our newly acquired ranch. Fields stretched off into the distance as far as the eye could see, not a neighbor in sight for miles. The cows were grazing, looking unhappy, their tails hanging straight down as they ignored the fresh grass all around them. I figured they were just upset from the long move. "Why do you think they needed so many locks?" my wife asked, taking a sip of her beer. It was the elephant in the room, so to speak, and I had to admit I was curious about it as well. Every door in the house had a deadbolt on it, inside and out. Not only that, but the windows were shielded by thick iron bars. The old owners had left long before we could ask them about it. The folks who lived here before were probably paranoid about home invasions so far from the city. "We'll take them down, and I'll fill the screw holes with wood putty. We'll paint them over, and they'll be good as new. You wanted to redo the trim anyway. And the bars on the windows? That'll take a bit more work, but I can get it done before the weekend. I'll just have to run over to the hardware store to grab a few things. I can't find some of my tools. Maybe they got lost during the move." My wife was no longer paying attention. She was staring at some point far off in the distance. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. I followed her finger and looked to see a large gray wolf moving in the fields. It seemed to be stalking deliberately toward us, marching at a steady, quick pace. It came to a fence and did the strangest thing. Instead of leaping over it or burrowing under it, as I'd expected, it stood up on two legs like a person, grasped the loose corner of the wire fencing, and pulled it up, ducking between the strands and stepping through, one leg after the other. It was exactly how I would have done it. Once it was on the other side, it went back on four legs and started its progress toward us again. Then it looked up and saw us staring at it. The gray wolf stayed still for a few seconds, then disappeared in the tall grass suddenly. It was just gone. It didn't dive into the grass or duck down. It was there, and then a moment later it was just gone. Vanished in the blink of an eye. The two of us sat uneasily on the porch, and I stood up to look in the distance, try to spot the creature. But it was nowhere to be found. "I'm going inside. You should come too," my wife said, sounding nervous. We went in and locked the doors at the front and back of the house. The bars stayed on the windows after that, and my wife didn't mention the deadbolts on the doors in the house again either. The two of us went to bed that night, with little talk between us, a big difference from the ecstatic chatter that had been the norm all day prior to the event with the wolf. Or whatever that thing was. I got the feeling wolf was not quite the right word. That night something else, even more disturbing, happened to us both. I woke up in the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m. according to the bedside alarm clock. When I looked next to me in the bed and saw my wife's spot was empty, I became immediately concerned for her safety. Where could she have gone at this time of night, I wondered. That was when I heard her voice calling to me from outside the window, asking insistently for me to let her in. Her cries for help were muffled through the glass, and I lifted the heavy, old window pane up to hear her better. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, worried about the wolf we'd seen earlier. I was looking around for glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight nearby. Standing on two legs or four, I wasn't sure which to expect. "I must have been sleepwalking," she said dreamily. The front door locked behind me somehow. "You have to let me back in. Please. It's cold out here." "I'll be right down," I said, without thinking about how impossible all of that was. I was only concerned for her safety at that moment, and she had been known to sleepwalk occasionally, so that part seemed to make sense. I raced down the stairs in my boxers and grasped the front door knob in my hand, turning it. Thankfully, it was locked, or who knows what might have happened. Reaching up to turn the lock, I was startled to hear a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" my wife asked. I jumped at the sound, my heartbeat quickening. But what terrified me even more was what I had just seen outside. Given the time frame it had taken me to get downstairs, it was impossible that it had been her. It was like someone else had been out there, wearing her skin and speaking in her voice. Looking at the woman standing in front of me, I had no doubt it was Christine, my wife. Panting, I walked over to her and hugged her tightly. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer, afraid she would think I was losing my mind. Some things we don't share with anyone, not even our significant others. We take them to our grave, afraid that if we speak of them out loud, it will make them true, and it will make the source of the impossible things return. So instead, I just took her hand and led her up the stairs, looking back nervously over my shoulder at the front door, waiting for the sound of a key turning in the lock, or the sound of it being broken down by powerful forces beyond my control. Instead, there was a gentle knock, polite almost at first, but then the fist began to pound against the front door of the house louder and louder, more and more insistently. My wife stopped, turning around to look at me on the stairs. "Who could that be at this time of night?" she asked. "Just ignore it. Let's go to bed. They'll go away eventually." After a few moments of hesitation, she turned around and began going up the stairs once more, taking a couple nervous looks back as she did. We kept walking up the stairs as the pounding continued, devolving into steady scratching noises that didn't cease until daybreak. "What were you doing down in the basement last night?" my wife asked at the breakfast table the next morning. Neither one of us mentioned the sounds at the door the night before. We were both trying to act like it had never happened. In the light of the morning, it seemed like a shared hallucination, a bad dream brought on by warm beer and too much time spent moving boxes without enough assistance. "In the basement?" "I wasn't in the basement," I told her. "Yeah, you were. You were calling my name, asking me to come down there." I looked at her with concern. "When was this?" "Right before I found you at the front door. I figured I just missed you, that you found whatever you were looking for down in the basement and went into the kitchen for a snack or something. But then I found you by the front door. I was never in the basement last night." She looked at me, puzzled. "Of course you were. Who else would have been calling for me from down there?" I debated telling her what I'd seen outside and decided I probably should. We were clearly dealing with something very strange here, and we needed to be on the same team if we were going to figure out. "Christine, did you go outside at all last night?" "No." "What does that have to do with Dash?" "Okay, so here's the thing. I saw you outside. At the same time, when you were going down to the basement, you were calling to me from out front, saying you had been sleepwalking and you were locked out. That's why I was at the door. I never went down to the basement, and I don't think it was really you outside, either. I think there's something else causing all this to happen." "What the hell could cause that to happen?" I opened my mouth to answer when there was a polite rapping at the door. The two of us sat dead silent for a few moments, unsure what to do. The knocking came again, and I heard a man's voice, muffled through the door, saying, "There's a car here. Maybe they're out in the fields." "Should we just leave it on the doorstep?" a woman's voice asked. "I don't like being here any more than you do, but that seems a bit rude. Maybe we should come back." Christine and I both stood up, sensing that this was not the same entity from the night before. I don't know how I could tell, but I just could. This wasn't an evil presence. It was just some neighbors coming by to welcome us. And they sounded like they might know something more than we did about the ranch and its mysteries. I opened the front door and saw a man and woman with their backs turned, walking away from us. They spun around when they heard the sound of us opening up. "Oh, hi there. We're the Turnbulls. We live down the road. Technically next door, as if there is such a thing out here. But we do share an easement with you to access the river. Jack takes the cattle down that way, sometimes for a change of scenery." The man put his arm around his wife's shoulder and whispered something in her ear. She abruptly stopped talking, realizing that she was rambling on nervously. "Sharon, I'm sure they don't want to get into all of that. We just wanted to stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood, so to speak. It's nice to have another couple living next door again. This place has been empty for so long." My wife and I looked at each other with surprise. As far as we knew, the place had been occupied right up until our arrival. It hadn't shown signs of disrepair or neglect, so we'd had no reason to think otherwise. "Really? No wonder the place was such a bargain. How long was it empty for? The man and woman shared a look. Oh, not that long. A few years. Anyways, we just wanted to bring this casserole. We have a few errands to run, but it was great meeting you both. Come on by our place anytime. When number 56981, the next driveway on your side up that way, the man said, hooking his thumb eastward. I had never seen anyone introduce themselves and run so quickly. I try not to take it personally. It was so nice to meet you both, the woman said, taking a few quick steps towards my wife and handing her the casserole dish. You can keep that dish, by the way. It's Pyrex. Great for casseroles. She backed up to join her husband, looking around the property nervously as she did. Hey, can I ask you something? The two of them looked ready to run back to their car, but they stopped and nodded, shifting on their feet anxiously and waiting for me to speak. Have you ever seen anything? How should I put this? There's been a couple weird occurrences since we moved in, and I was just wondering if you could tell us anything. Is this place haunted? Is that why it was so cheap? I could tell you guys are nervous. Just give us something to work with. Please. We're getting a little freaked out. The woman looked pleadingly at her husband. He nodded to her, and she went back to the car and got in the passenger seat where she sat darting her eyes around from side to side. What exactly did you see? The man asked. Wait, no. Don't tell me. It's better if we don't speak of them. They know when you talk about them. It's better if we don't. Well then, how we get rid of them? You don't. These things have been around a lot longer than you or me. My wife and I get our share of strange events on the ranch next door too, but not as bad as here. This place, well, there's something here that makes it special. And not in a good way. I'm sorry to say. I'd tell you more, but it would only make things worse. It always does. There is a sound of knuckles rapping against the glass, and I looked to see his wife banging on the car window, looking with wide eyes at us and pointing into the distance, towards the fields. My eyes followed where she was pointing, and I looked to see the large gray wolf was back, and it was moving towards us again. I told you, we're not meant to speak of them. I need to go. The two of you should decide soon if you want to stay. This place will change you, and it will take things from you. You only get so long to decide. If you wait to see what the changes will be, it will already be too late. Trust me. With that, he turned away and went back to his car. He started the engine and drove off much quicker than I would have thought safe on the dirt driveway, swerving and leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air around us, obstructing my view for a few seconds. When I turned around again, the wolf was much, much closer. It was about 50 yards away and closing in fast. It was looking at me intently. My wife was running back towards the house, yelling at me to come, but I was frozen, watching the wolf as it stood on its hind legs again. Not a wolf. Stop calling it a wolf. It's not a wolf. It's just trying to fool you into thinking that's what it is. But it's so much more dangerous than that. I tried to take a step, but my legs wouldn't budge. My eyes were locked on the wolf as it began to stalk towards me. No longer an animal, but something else wearing an animal suit. The ancient leathery-skinned humanoid beneath the wolf armor could be glimpsed occasionally as it strode like a hunter in my direction, taking long steps, moving low to the ground. The fur pieces were simply strapped onto it like clothing, the wolf head strapped on like a hat. What are you doing? Get in here, my wife yelled one more time, and my foot suddenly started to move. As soon as it did, I found I was unfrozen and finally able to start running, and not a second too soon. The house was close, but the thing was fast. When it saw me beginning to run, it became a wolf again in an instant. The idea that it was anything but that seemed ludicrous as I watched it race towards me on all fours, its snapping jaws dripping saliva as it dove to cut me off. This thing was a massive gray wolf, through and through. It could be nothing but that, and yet my eyes had begged otherwise just a moment before. If not for my wife, it might have gotten me. But she saw what was happening and took a large rock we had been using as a doorstop and threw it straight at the thing's head. It missed, hitting the beast in the shoulder instead, but it was enough to drive it back for a brief second, which was all I needed. I ran into the house and slammed the door shut behind me. An instant later, the scratching began again. Soon there was another one at the back door, scratching it as well. The sounds continued for hours. When the noises stopped and I finally ventured outside again, I found that 3 of the cattle had been killed. The others were scared out of their wits, hiding huddled together in a corner of the field near to the house. Their eyes darted around the fields, reminding me of how the neighbors had looked as they scanned our property for the things lurking in the shadows. I was beginning to suspect we were not going to be able to stay in this place much longer. Even if we could survive, this was no way to live. That night, my wife and I sat in the living room with all the blinds and curtains drawn, discussing what we would do. The house wouldn't sell quickly. That much was obvious based on the neighbors' statements. The 2 of us decided we would leave in the morning regardless. We would stay in a motel until we found an apartment to rent, sacrificing all of our investment in the house. Even if we put it up for sale again, it would be a long, long time before we made any portion of our money back. But it was too dangerous and too terrifying to stay. "I'm going to bed," my wife said, looking tired. "Come upstairs soon, okay? I don't want to be alone." "I'll be up in a minute," I told her. "I just want to grab a glass of water." She nodded sleepily and went up the stairs slowly, looking depressed. We had dreamed about this move for so long, and now it was all coming to ruins. I felt sad about it too. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. After drinking it down in one long gulp, I decided I needed another. It had been a long day, and I'd been too distracted to drink anything. A noise came from upstairs, a scraping sound like claws. Setting down the glass, I turned around and listened closely. "Christine." She didn't reply. I took a few steps across the linoleum floor of the kitchen before calling out again. Once again, there was no answer. By the time I got to the bottom of the stairs, my heart was pounding so fast and hard, I felt like it would beat right out of my chest. I opened my mouth to call her name one more time when I saw it. The wolf that wasn't a wolf strode on 2 legs across the gap at the top of the stairs, then disappeared around the corner, heading towards my wife. It was so quick that I thought for a moment I could have imagined it. Just a gray blur that was gone in an instant. If not for the fact that it looked down the stairs at me and smiled, its long canines gleaming in the light. Its eyes were pure blackness. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, terrified of what it would do to her. When I got to the 2nd floor, I looked down the hall to see all of the doors were closed. It was as if the whole thing had really been just my imagination. Taking an unsteady step towards the bedroom, my heartbeat did not slow down even slightly. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, turning it and entering the master bedroom. I entered hesitantly, finding the room dark and my wife asleep in bed. Part of me wanted to wake her up, but for some reason I didn't. "It will be fine, just go to bed," my irrational thoughts said. My pounding heart began to slow and my eyelids grew heavy. "This is fine," my mind told me. "Everything is fine. Just go to sleep now." Trying not to think of what I had seen just moments before, I climbed into bed, getting in next to my wife and shivering while my body warmed up beneath the sheets. There was a soft sound of padding footsteps outside the bedroom door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something wants to get inside the bedroom, and a strange, foreign voice in my mind is telling me to let it in. Second story. Skinwalker / Goatman thingy sighting. I was told to post this here by a friend as he said my story sounded similar to some urban legend about skinwalkers / Goatman. I've never heard of it before, but I Googled it and saw lots of stories and videos about it, and something about some farm in Utah in America. Anyway, some background. I'm 28 years old and I live in Kent in England. Ever since a kid, I've always had this weird obsession about the States, traveling through the States and generally seeing lots of sights. I'm not a city guy, far from it. My parents are both farmers and I like the outdoors a lot. I joined a rock climbing club when I was in my teens and met 2 good friends, James and Grant, who came on the trip with me in 2012. I had always planned to go to the States, Colorado to be specific, because of the forests and the mountains. We all agreed to go, save for a year, and off we went. We were in Denver, which by the way is a great city. and later we traveled south down Highway 87, through Colorado Springs down to Walsenburg, and then headed west, and ended up in a very small town after about 4/5 hours, somewhere close to the New Mexico border. We had actually got there due to meeting some friends in Denver who were keen explorers like ourselves, and they asked if we wanted to join them on a road trip/camping trip. So we did. There were 5 of them: Chris, another James, Richard, Melissa, and Lucy. And us 3, myself, James, and Grant. The first 2 nights were great. Chris and Richard liked to hunt and had brought alone their rifles with them, and they taught us a few things about shooting and whatnot. On the 3rd night, all 8 of us went on a little walk through the forest, having a look around and taking all the amazing views in. The girls, Lucy and Melissa, wanted to head back to the cabin to start cooking the dinner for us, and Richard went back with them. So Chris, the 2 James, Grant, and I roamed around. Up ahead on the trail, I point out to Chris I saw what looked like a deer, but as quick as I could grab their attention and turn back around, it was gone. I probably made way too much noise, to be honest, and scared it off. But a few minutes later, I saw it again. It was a little weird, though. It looked a little darker than a deer and had more fur. It didn't look right at all. It was like a man on all 4s or something, and just didn't seem to move very smoothly. I must have been so focused on this deer that I was completely oblivious to the smell that surrounded us that Grant pointed out. It smelled like death or blood, but it felt warm and metallic. It was horrible. I asked Chris if there was some kind of factory nearby, but he said there wasn't really anything like that for miles. I really did smell. It was stomach-turning, and I have a strong stomach from living on a farm for my whole life. We turned back anyway to head back to the cabin to meet the others. We walked for about 10 minutes when I saw what looked like the same deer in the distance to my right, and I swear to God it stood up on its hind legs. I called Chris at the front and said to the others to look to the right, and they did. James laughed and said it looks like a guy, and Grant suggested it was another group of people out walking as well. But I told them it stood up and that it was the deer from earlier. I tried to get them a look at. I was adamant about it. But they looked at me like I was stupid, as it was definitely a figure of a person with his back to us. Chris called out at it, and there was no reply. He called again, and nothing. Then we all shouted out, "Are you okay over there?" The reply was subtle, but loud enough to be heard. "It's Richard." We all looked at each other confused, because he was supposed to be with the girls. He called out again, "It's Richard," and it definitely sounded like him. Chris told him to stop ***king around, and we carried on walking, and I looked back after no more than 5-10 seconds, and he was gone completely. That was no way enough time to just disappear without seeing him run off. We got back to the cabin eventually. Lucy and Melissa were in the kitchen making dinner, and Richard was chilling with them. Chris told Richard to not leave the girls again, as he was the only one with them, and it wasn't safe to leave them alone due to wild animals. But Richard said he'd been here the whole time with them. Confusing. Chris, Grant, the 2 James, and I looked at each other and laughed, telling him we saw him in the woods with us, and you said it's Richard when we shouted at him. But he looked at us with a dead straight face. "Seriously, guys, I was here the whole time," and the girls confirmed it. We all just shrugged it off. The 3 of them were in on the joke. They got us. I managed to wake up around 3 a.m., dead thirsty, and needed a drink, and that rank smell was back. The smell probably woke me up, to be honest. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and I could hear rustling from outside. It wasn't like someone was walking, but it sounded like someone was crawling around. I turned on the outside light, which didn't do much at all, but about 20 meters away at the edge of the forest, I saw another figure. It was very dark outside, and I'm sure I was just seeing things, but the figure was like yesterday, just there, motionless, a black-figured silhouette with its back turned towards me. I was freaking out. I went back to the bedrooms and woke up the boys. They weren't really 100% awake yet. Probably pissed off I'd woken them up, but when I showed them what I was looking at, they soon came around. James opened the cabin door, which was facing where the person was, to get a better view, and we all huddled around the door entrance to see also. Chris had a huge mag light torch on him and just shone at the figure, and it didn't move. Grant shouted out, in a typical British way, "You cunt," which just made us laugh, but the figure didn't move. We were pretty alarmed by this point, and we decided to go back inside. And as we turned around to go back, and we heard, it's Richard." We all just looked at each other, and we all looked at Richard, and chaos ensued. I and the others had no idea what the hell to do. Richard wasn't, to my knowledge, a guy that could throw his voice, but the voice was his, and Richard did not speak. We waited for what seemed like a lifetime for the sun to come up, constantly checking outside. Richard and Chris's rifles never left their hands. We grabbed the girls and just left as fast as we could. Third story. Don't tell Skinwalker stories around a campfire. I was camping in Arizona with my cousin. We built a fire, then got some marshmallows out to make some s'mores. It was a warm night, but we were having a good time. I hadn't gone camping with my cousin in years, since we were teenagers. I blew the flame out on my marshmallow and crushed it between 2 graham crackers and chocolate. "Do you want to hear a scary story?" my cousin asked with a sly grin on his face. When we were younger, he used to always tell scary stories around the fire. I couldn't help but get excited. "Let's see if he still got it," I said with my own grin. "Have you ever heard of Skinwalker?" he asked, popping a marshmallow in his mouth. "Yeah, isn't it a native legend? Something about turning into a coyote." "Yes, a skinwalker is a Navajo witch that wears the skins of animals and can turn into any animal they want." He leans in closer so the fire illuminates his face. "What's so scary about that?" I ask. "You don't want to run into one of them. Trust me, I have." I say nothing, waiting for him to continue on with the story. "I was visiting my friend on the res one day this summer after graduation. We were hanging out on the porch, talking about what we were going to do now that school was over. Just wasting the night away, you know. Then I noticed a coyote just wandering around a few yards away. Now in this neighborhood, there weren't any fences dividing the yards, so I could see it walk from yard to yard. I nudged my friend and nodded over to it. We got quiet and just watched it. Then it stood up on 2 feet. It was pressed up against a house in the shadows and just scooted along on 2 feet like a human. I was so shocked. I didn't think coyotes could do that. My friend whispered to me, "That's no coyote." I asked him what he meant. That's a skinwalker." Now, he had mentioned skinwalkers to me before, but I thought it was just a legend, and that he surely didn't believe some old story his parents told him to scare him from playing in the woods at night. Once it was next to a garbage can, it hopped on top of it, then leaped up, grabbing onto the window ledge. The window was open. Fear filled my body as I realized 2 things. No coyote could do that, and whoever was in that room was about to have a very bad night. Then we heard the guy in that room screaming. Then his screams were drowned out by a scream that was somewhat of a mix of animal and human. We fell out of our chairs, scrambling to get inside. We locked all the doors and windows and hid. That was the scariest night of my life. I don't remember if cops showed up to that house. We were too scared to leave the room and check. But it's a night I'll never forget. Goosebumps cover my arms. Now, that was a good story. I didn't believe him about it being true, but it was a good story nonetheless. Looks like you still got it. That was good. Got me being scared to look into the trees. I laughed, nervously looking behind me at the forest that seems just a little scarier now. Hey, every word of that is true. I didn't make this one up. No need to make up a scary story when you've lived it. He has a pleased look on his face nonetheless. We sat in silence for a bit, and I thought about the story he just told. For some reason, a coyote creeping around on 2 legs just seems comical. I laughed to myself. Maybe it would be creepier in person. After another 30 minutes, the fire dies down and we crawl into our tent. All thoughts of skinwalkers had left our heads. I was drifting off to sleep when a stick snapping outside our tent woke me up. My face was facing the wall of the tent, and I don't think I'd quite registered what woke me up. After a few seconds, I closed my eyes and prepared to go back to sleep. Then I heard my cousin outside the tent calling my name. I opened my eyes. I assumed my cousin had stepped outside for some reason, but I didn't know what he would need me for out there. I didn't quite want to leave my sleeping bag, so I was just going to pretend like I didn't hear him. I closed my eyes again. Then I heard him call me again. Annoyed, I sat up to leave the tent. That's when I noticed my cousin right next to me. Asleep. I knew I heard him call me from outside the tent. I heard it twice. There was no mistake. I shook him awake. "What do you want?" he asked groggily, not opening his eyes. "I heard your voice outside the tent calling my name. Am I going crazy?" He opens his eyes, a panicked look in his eyes. You're absolutely sure? My voice. He asks. Yeah, twice. There was no mistaking it. He pulls me down to the ground next to him. We hear some shuffling outside the tent. I start to freak out a little. That's a skinwalker. They can imitate voices. That's how they draw you in. He whispers. A skinwalker? Are you sure? What's the odds of a skinwalker showing up the same night you tell me the story? Don't mess with me. I whisper back. Talking about a skinwalker at night can draw it to you. I didn't think about that when I told the story. Just stay quiet and stay down, and hopefully it will leave. The sound of another stick snapping didn't help at all. After a few long, frightful hours of laying their eyes wide open, it seemed to go away. Eventually I fell asleep, I guess. I don't remember falling asleep, and don't know how I could. My cousin was already packing everything up by the time I crawled out of the tent. I know we planned for 2 more nights, but we're getting out of here right now. Yeah, I'm with you on that, I said. Now I can't say for sure it was a skinwalker that night, but I can say I definitely heard my cousin calling my name from outside the tent when he was sleeping right next to me. And that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. So take my advice and save the skinwalker stories for when you're safe in the comforts of home and not for the campfire. 4th story. You all need to chill about skinwalkers. I've been lurking around this subreddit for a while now, reading some of the biggest hits and the like. This is the first time I've actually made an account. First of all, let me thank each and every one of you for making me feel less alone. I've seen and done some crazy things in my life, and I'm not proud of some of them. Reading all of your stories makes me feel more normal. Now that's over. You all need to chill about the skinwalkers. I mean, the second you see someone talk about their experiences in a forest, you all run around screaming skinwalk like it's the end of the whole world and they're definitely going to die. And you do that regardless of where they are geographically, what time of year it is, or even the types of events they're experiencing. Honestly, it's enough to make me want to bang my head against the wall sometimes. First of all, they aren't even skinwalkers. Skinwalkers probably don't even exist anymore, since the Navajo culture has dwindled significantly, and, to my knowledge, there have been no Navajo shamans who have rejected their faith in recent years. It's possible there's 1 or 2 still around, but they're going to be low in number and in northeast Arizona and parts of New Mexico. They're desert dwellers and aren't even found in forests. The creatures that you're calling skinwalkers have never been given a proper name, but I've called them voice takers since I first encountered one when I was 12 or so. Back then, I lived with my parents in the forests of Northern California way off the beaten track. I mean, it was like an hour drive to the nearest town. It was that isolated. Our family had lived there for almost 40 years, so the creatures in the forest more or less left us alone until I got old enough to wander into the woods by myself. They were always curious about me, and more than once I had one knocking on my window in the early hours of the morning, but I don't count those as encounters because I was never in any real danger. The first time one properly got to me, I was 12 years old and out in the forest alone for the first time. It was my first year going to school instead of being homeschooled by my mother, and I, like most 12-year-olds, hated school. So I went in the forest to blow off some steam. It was getting dark already and was approaching sunset, which is important because voice takers, like most of the creatures in the forest, are nocturnal. I was walking along one of the trails, not paying attention to where I was going, when I heard someone call my name. They sounded just like my mother. So I called back, Mom. And, of course, it called to me again. Let me just say that this voice taker was smart. In fact, it was the smartest voice taker that I've ever come across. Most of the time, they aren't much more intelligent than your average dog, which is why they usually imitate animals. That's just as effective as using a human voice. You would not believe the number of campers who will follow the sound of a dog barking in the forest for miles. Anyway, it was calling me from the direction of my house. So, of course, I turn around and start heading back towards the house and towards the voice taker. It's still calling me, and I'm yelling back every couple minutes. And then it says, Alicia, I can hear you. Come over here. It sounded like my mother was terrified. I never saw my mother afraid before or after this incident, but I knew that she was then. This voice taker does fear and anxiety really well, by the way. Before I move away from that house, I could pick it out of the crowd because it always sounds hurt. So I start panicking a little, not knowing why she was upset. I could tell that my mom was off the path, so I stepped off of it and kept following the sound of her voice, all the while telling her I was coming and to just wait for me. I get to where her voice is coming from, and it's coming from right behind this big tree. I walked around it, and the voice taker was there. One of the things you guys always get right is that voice takers don't want to be seen. They prefer to stay hidden until the very last second, and there's a damn good reason for that. They are ugly and awkward and won't pass for anything besides a voice taker when you lay eyes on them. This one was standing upright with its back against the tree, with its huge circular mouth hanging open, humpbacked with its shoulders at an awkward angle. One of its legs had been broken at some point, and it was standing awkwardly. It was scary as hell to hear my mother's voice echoing out of that gaping, circular hole it called mouth. "There you are, Alicia," it said. I tried to run away, obviously, but it grabbed me. It wasn't much larger than I was, and it was skeletal and weak-looking, but being grabbed by it felt like I was being held by an adult 3 times my size. It threw me to the ground and climbed on top of me. That mouth expanded vertically, and then the rest of its body did too, like it had a zipper from the top of its head all the way down to its belly button. Flesh peeled backwards and opened up, exposing the inside of its body. The bones went too, the ribs and skull flexing like they were made of rubber. It was hollow inside, except for these pale sacs of flesh that hung pulsating from the inside of its rib cage and what looked like tonsils in its throat. I was trying to scream, but by then the weight of its body had pressed all the air out of my lungs. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest, and I couldn't move my arms or legs. Those pale organs inside of its rib cage started to grow and reach toward my face, and my adrenaline spiked so hard I felt my consciousness try to leave my body. It gave me a needed boost of clarity and awareness of my body. I managed to get my legs up against the voice taker and started kicking the inside of its torso, contorting my body to keep my face as far away from its organs as possible. After a couple seconds of that, it shifted to hold down my legs and I got my arm loose. To this day, I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but I reached out and punched it in the tonsil. It screamed so loud and in so many different voices all at once that my senses almost couldn't handle it. It was like being blasted full volume with every action movie fight scene all at once. My ears started ringing, and I actually thought I had died for a moment. Then I realized I was still alive, and I punched again, hitting the other voice sac this time. The same thing happened again, and the voice taker was finally stunned enough to loosen its hold on me a little bit. I kicked it off of me and got to my feet. I seized the nearest large stick and hit the thing in the head twice. Then its zipper started to close up again. Instead of leaving well enough alone, I grabbed whatever I could from the ground and stuffed it inside. Rocks, leaves, beetles, flowers, pine needles. It all went into that voice taker. I wasn't able to get much in there, but what I did manage was enough to make it retch and spill open again, its body literally turning inside out. While it was lying there writhing and flapping like a demonic manta ray, I stood up, still holding the stick I had used to beat it, which is when I noticed there were 3 more watching me from the tree line. At this point, it was almost fully dark, but I could make them out because my entire body was aware of their shape now, like how you instantly recognize a snake when you see one. I was dead terrified, but I was angry too at that point, and I knew they wouldn't just let me leave. So I screamed as loudly as I could. "What do you want? I'll beat you all too." But none of them approached me, and after a few seconds, I backed away from all 4 of them. When none followed, I took my new stick and ran all the way back to the house. I was bleeding from the ears and temporarily deaf for about 10 minutes afterward, and sometimes I still hear ringing in my ears because of it. The voice takers never tried to lure me away ever again. I would tell you that I don't know why they all didn't pile onto me that night and kill me, but that would be a lie. I won't tell you why right now, though. If people ask, I might explain later, but for now, let's just say that there's a whole lot more than voice takers in most forests. And they're like coyotes or foxes in terms of the food chain, mostly feeding off scraps and remains other creatures leave behind. I learned later that their diet mostly consists of leaves and grass, that they only go after humans and other large animals during their breeding season, which begins in late summer and extends to mid-fall. The other thing that I learned later is why punching that voice taker in the tonsil. They collect sounds in the sacs in their throat. I don't know how, but they literally capture voices and release them back out. The voice taker that attacked me must have been hanging around the house for months or years, catching fragments of my mother's voice in order to catch me off guard. When I punched those sacs, I released all of the sounds that the voice taker had stored up. It was the equivalent of punching someone's breath out of them, but like I had actually managed to collapse its lungs. Now, obviously, I don't recommend dealing with voice takers this way, since you'll probably just be eaten by others even if you incapacitate one in this way. Instead, if you think you're being attacked by voice takers, set up speakers facing outwards from your house or campsite and play something with a whole bunch of voices in it. Sitcoms and comedy shows with ensemble casts are best, especially if they have a laugh track. The voice taker will be so preoccupied with collecting new voices and sounds that it will probably stop trying to attack you for that night. And then instead of hearing the voices of your friends or animals calling you from the woods, you get to hear snippets of dialogue from the office for a week or so. It's good fun and a lot less difficult to explain away. Plus, you'll give the other creatures in the woods a laugh with it, which is always a good first impression. If voice takers are your biggest problem, you've gotten off easy. I should mention that some of the other creatures that stories here have lumped in under the title Skinwalker are different from the voice takers and are a whole lot more difficult to deal with. But I don't want to make this any longer than it already is, and I'm not convinced you'll take my advice even if I gave it. Thank you all for reading, and I hope you appreciate my advice and story. It's really helped me to type this out and get it off my chest. I never told anyone about what happened with the voice takers, not even my parents. Neither of them believed in their existence, and I never got the chance to prove it to them. Fifth story, The Singing Skinwalker. This story was told to me by one of my good friends, who's of Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. My friend, Jessie, was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of parched bur oak trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange, as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found a frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me. Cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying, scary story cliche of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her even when she looked around her and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the kids to come inside. The true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she'd been singing in the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded. When I nodded, Jessie added, "It was like that, but a little clearer." Somehow, that made it even worse. Jessie and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protests, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she had ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer, with antlers like dead tree branches and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body with abnormally long arms and legs. And as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a clawed hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpeted floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what had happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day. No arguments. She looked so shaken nobody dared protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of the Skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a Skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes." "Grandma," said Jessie as a light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song. You know, the lullaby you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago 7, to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened." Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow, I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you. Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. "You think nothing will happen to you because you're white. But when you're in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution." I nodded. "Yes." That night, I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city unscathed. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral. But I suppose if there is something to be learned from the story of the singing Skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience told me everything I need to know. What she saw truly horrified her, and all I can say is, I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. Sixth story, the Michigan Skinwalkers. Before we begin this story, I've lived in Michigan all my life. I grew up in the Lower Peninsula on the western half of the state. I've never been much of a supernatural believer, but goddamn, do I love a good scary story. That is when my life isn't that scary story. A few years ago, I decided with a group of friends to go camping up in the Upper Peninsula. We were meant to stop at a local campground near Sault Ste. Marie State Forest. It was just a few friends and myself, for people all together. We brought some basic gear with us, a single tent designed for a family. So your basic 2 large room tent with a large canopy door right on the front end and the 4 zip-up windows. We've all seen them on TV or some Christmas or late spring ads. We brought some kerosene grills because hot damn it ain't no camping trip without cooking on the grill at least once. And we brought fishing gear and some change of clothes as we planned to be here for a few days, 3 at the least 5 at the most. Just a buddy trip, you know. I brought one of my personal favorite rifles, my Weatherby Vanguard with some .257 WBUI. Ammo boxes, figuring that as long as we were going to be so far north, I might as well pack a rifle. Even if I didn't take pot shots at squirrels or some lost coons, I knew that the area was known for brown bears and wolves. The Weatherby is a bolt-action hunting rifle. It doesn't have a huge range, isn't even well respected for what it is, but it was a good shot, and if you know what you're doing without a scope on it, you can still score 1 to 2 shot kills. I'll call my friends Justin, Eric, and Joe for the sake of the story. Justin brought his dad's Cooper M52, another bolt-action hunting rifle, taking .280 Remington rounds. Eric decided this trip would be a good time to test his new Remington R15 semi-automatic accepting .30 RAR rounds. Finally, Joe brought a family-favored CZ 550 hunter rifle, taking .300 Winchester rounds. Guns all thrown in the back of the single car we were taking, a 2002 Silver Grand AM that was missing a hubcap on the front right tire, and all our gear piled on top of the weapons. We double-checked to make sure everyone had permits, licenses, and forms of identification. I hopped in the driver's seat and peered around the interior of the car. The material on the ceiling was coming loose from the old glue holding it there. My friend Justin was sitting straight behind me, while Joe was on his right, leaving Eric to my right in the passenger side of the car. We began our journey by shooting up Highway I-96, which later turns into Highway 131 connecting to I-75 coming from the west side of the state. We drove north with 97.9 GRD on for a short period of the ride. The station turned to static as we left the city's greater area, though. We stopped once we reached Cadillac for gas and snacks. Man, feels like we've been stuck in that car for an eternity, Justin said as we stretched fully for the first time in what seemed like weeks. After filling the tank and jumping back on 131, we continued the now half-over journey north, past Gaylord and to Mackinac. I figured the scariest part of this journey would be crossing that damned suspension bridge. Turns out the bridge was easy. People always tell stories of how you can feel the bridge swaying from time to time and hear creaking as the bridge shifts its own weight in the wind. By the time we crossed the bridge, it was getting darker out. We had been surrounded by woods and thick forest and state parks for quite some time. Most of northern Michigan is covered in trees and eerie forests. It was 10 p.m. when we arrived at the spot we'd call home for the night. It was a summer evening sometime in late June. It was June 21st or June 25th, I can't quite remember anymore. We stopped in a small clearing just a few miles from where the campgrounds were. We were about as far from any main roads as we could be when we stopped. However, a single event stuck in my head the entire time we set up that night in the spot we decided we'd just stay in. Around 8:30, we had stopped again at another truck stop on I-75 in St. Ignace, coming into the Upper Peninsula, An older woman with graying short hair and an aging face asked what four young men were doing traveling so far into nowhere on such a beautiful summer night. When we explained we intended to stay in the Sault Ste. Marie State Forest for about a week, she had a strange look come over her face, as if she suddenly became twisted in fear and worry. All she told us, as we left the station, was to be careful and have fun. We thought nothing of it, just a kind older woman worried for some young kids who surely had no outdoor experience. At 11 p.m., the stars began to shine so bright in the sky, we began to name the constellations, starting from the Little Dipper and ending at Orion's Belt, realizing none of us even knew astronomical formations well enough to name anything past the basics that every 10-year-old and their uncle can name. By this time, we had a campfire roaring 8 feet in front of the family tent. We brought along most of our stuff was inside of the tent now. I had brought my Weatherby out to see if any critters of the night wanted to poke their heads out. Eric had his Remington R-15 out as well. The other two guys' rifles were in the tent, just inside the doorway. We sat shooting the shit for a few hours, roasting marshmallows until the fire began to die down. Talking and having a good OL time. We hadn't brought any drinks other than a 12-pack of cola, which we smashed in the first 2 hours, which left us with bottled water basically. We had no issue with that, though. Around 3 a.m., Joe got up and piled some wood on the fire to give it a breath of new life. Suddenly I noticed something. The woods were dead silent. Now, I'm not a survival expert, and I'm not a hunter or even a soldier, but I do know when the sounds of nature stop, it's time to get the hell out. It was 3 a.m, though. We were all exhausted and didn't want to move, even if it meant shooting at some brown bear tonight. I told the other 3 to shut up and just listen. Joe and Justin went and grabbed their rifle from the tent for security, while Eric and I loaded one into the chambers of our rifles and switched the safeties off. I glanced at Eric, who was shooting glances into the trees, just beyond the light of the once again growing fire. I was about to ask him if he was all right when Justin and Joe came back with their rifles ready. The woods then quivered in the wind, and we heard the noise for the first time in the 2 days we stayed. It was like a howl mixed with human screaming, but the screaming sounded artificial. I went cold and clammy immediately. I clutched my Weatherby, pointing it in the direction of the sound. Joe lifted his rifle quickly in the same direction while kneeling near the fire. Justin looked like he had seen a ghost, pale and wide-eyed, just listening. Suddenly, a coppery smell filled the camp with a mix of rotting flesh. Bushes nearby began to rustle, and a pair of silver-yellow eyes glared out at us. My stomach sank as I drew a cold breath in when I saw them. They weren't the eyes of any wolves from around here, or the eyes of a curious raccoon or critter of the night. They were the eyes of a ghastly predator who doesn't run from the sight of 4 grown men carrying rifles strong enough to put down an ox. The set of eyes seemed to study us, unmoving and unblinking. Just 2 set orbs in the bushes. The scent was growing stronger all this time. We began to hear more rustling from the eastern side of the clearing, the original set of eyes being to the west. I looked to the east and saw 2 more sets of eyes glaring out at us. I almost screamed and let out a small cry. It was at that time that growling, or maybe low mumbling, almost a murmur, began to set all around us. Eric began screaming and unloading .30s into the near set of eyes. He missed the first 3 shots, but the 4th landed with a loud THUMPF, followed by the most terrifying noise I've ever heard. It was like a wild beast crying out in anguish and hatred at the same time. The eyes which had been studying us were now gone, followed by the sound of a pack of whatever the hell had been watching us moving off to the north. We sat for 15 minutes as the awful smell faded from our nostrils, and the sound of wildlife began to return. As we began to relax at 4:15 in the morning, I realized that with dawn beginning to break, my hands were white where the rifle sat cradled in them just 10 minutes before. I had been gripping my gun so tight that it left marks in my hands. Eric and I wanted the hell out of these woods that day, but Justin and Joe insisted that we stay even if just to rest. So we did, of course, because I realized that we hadn't slept. So we took shifts watching outside the tent for the damned animals to come back, even though it was broad daylight now. We stayed much longer than intended, because after a rest we concluded they were just a pack of wolves, and the noises were our brains playing tricks on us. Around 9 p.m. that night, I loaded my rifle again, not taking a chance getting caught off guard by a wild gray. It was uneventful until midnight. The smell returned, but this time it was 10 times worse. Joe gagged and threw up beside the tent. I listened, remembering the night before. The woods were dead silent, not even the sound of the wind. Tonight something different happened, though. At 12:30 a.m., the woods suddenly filled with violent screams all around us, human but not human at the same time. It's hard to describe. The smell of rotting flesh was overcome by the smell of copper, an awful metallic smell that burns the inside of your nostrils. I lifted my Weatherby in 1 second, pointing it toward the nearest scream, when I saw a pair of eyes in the direction of my rifle, the same glaring silver-yellow eyes as the night before. But this time the eyes were full of hatred, and they began to rise. The eyes now sat at 7 feet above the ground. Goosebumps formed on my entire body as I broke into a cold sweat. These were not wolves. These were no goddamn wolves. Wolves don't stand at 7 feet. I can see the silver-yellow eyes, but they don't stand up, and they especially don't stand that tall. This time it was Joe who screamed, and he screamed loud. I looked in his direction and saw not 2, but 3 pairs of eyes standing 7 feet above the ground where he was pointing his CZ-550. I heard soft thumping from in front of me and snapped my head back forward toward where I was aiming and saw the eyes approaching me fast. I squeezed my trigger, feeling the kick of my rifle throwing itself back in my shoulder. I heard the thump of bullet meeting flesh, and I pulled the bolt up and back on my rifle, sliding another .257 into the chamber, and squeezed that round off within 2 seconds of the other round, hearing another thump as I pulled the bolt up and back again, loading another shell into the chamber. My nose filled with the smell of gunpowder, copper, and rotting flesh as I heard the eyes scream their terrible scream in front of me. After I pumped 2.257 rounds into them within 3 seconds, the thing dropped back down on 4s, or however many legs it walked on. Maybe it just slouched and ran off hightailing it. I realized the woods went silent with the creature's scream. Suddenly, all at once, the terrible screams filled the woods again. I hadn't realized it, but Eric, Joe, and Justin had been firing their rifles while I was taking shots at my target. The air was filled with gunpowder and the sound of 4 grown men breathing frantically while working new magazines into their rifles in the midst of a living nightmare. Suddenly, from the south, just behind our tent, a large thud grabbed Joe's attention, and the sound of canvas material shredding made us all 180 and fire into the back of the tent, eliciting another loud scream of agony and hatred from one of the beasts as it ran into the cover of the forest. However, we quickly judged that they were just running back to cover. We realized that our bullets were only hurting them. They were not dealing real damage. This terrified us. How long can we keep these things at bay while we can't even really hurt them? I then realized I hadn't even seen one yet, just the glare of their eyes in the bushes. We grabbed our ammo and began to walk sideways to the Silver Grand AM parked 30 feet away. The eyes, now 10 pairs altogether, glared at us while studying our movements. We made it to the care and jumped in quickly. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. Nothing. The car wouldn't start. I nearly crapped myself from fear. Now we're stuck out here with God knows what, and no way out other than to trek the 5 miles to the closest truck stop, which was a curt hell no. I had opted to change the motors in the windows of my Grand Am into manual levers, and the motors in the windows were crap and slow anyway, so we all rolled our windows down enough to point a rifle outside the car. When we did, the car filled with the smell of rot. Suddenly, not even 5 feet in front of us, sat a pair of the hate-filled eyes. I decided to test something and switched the brights on. The lights glared to life. This told me that the battery wasn't dead, which was a short-lived relief, as what I saw scared the shit out of me. The creature quickly moved outside the reach of my brights, but not so fast I didn't catch a glimpse. It was a sleek reddish-brown creature, almost resembled a wolf. but it was far too long, 3 feet too long. I saw gnarled teeth and 4-inch black claws, almost like a dog's. Eric let out a whimper from the passenger side seat. I almost thought he saw what I did, but when I looked over, my heart turned to stone. A single pair of silvery yellow eyes shone not 3 inches from his window. A low whine, gaining in intensity, began to grow near the car until it was deafening. After that, I blacked out. I woke up the next morning next to Justin. The sun was blazing, and the clearing didn't show any signs of what happened the night before, not even shell casings from the fired rifles. A Forest Ranger's Bronco was parked 10 feet behind my Grand AM. The Ranger was talking to a terrified Eric, while Joe was sitting near the fire on a log we had used to sit on the last 2 nights. The Ranger told us to pack up and get out while we could after hearing our accounts on the story. Said that it wasn't uncommon for travelers and campers to just go missing around here and show up again on the side of the road as totally different people. At that, we all rushed to get our licenses out and prove that we were us on the Ranger's order. He said we were lucky to be alive and wouldn't say anything else as he watched us hurry and pack what few things we had that weren't destroyed. The camp was ransacked. Little to nothing remained useful other than our rifles. Except my Weatherby had a small scratch just before the butt of the gun. The scratch resembled one of the eyes of the creature from the night before. After we packed, the Ranger gave us a jump, even though the battery was alive, and while last night, the Ranger insisted. The Grand AM fired to life. I asked the Ranger why he had responded. People from the camp a few miles out reported screams and gunfire from this direction. He responded in a short manner. He watched us drive away, and then I realized, thinking back to it, how stiff his movements were and how rehearsed what he said seemed almost inhuman. I drove back to I-75 and booked it at 80 miles per hour to 131 back toward home. We never spoke of the occurrence again and agreed that our big adventures would consist of just staying at each other's houses from now on. I still hear faint howling and imagine the hateful eyes outside my window from time to time, forcing me to close the blinds to tiny slits while loading my Weatherby and laying back in bed with the safety on. 7th story. I saw a Skinwalker. It was a few years back during a road trip with my buddy Jake. We were cruising through the desert, chasing that feeling of freedom you only get on the open road. But little did we know, we were about to encounter something that would shatter that sense of freedom and leave us fighting for our lives. We were driving through Navajo territory, miles away from civilization, when we saw it, a figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated by the headlights of our car. At first, we thought it was just a trick of the light, but as we got closer, we realized it was something else entirely. It looked like a man, but there was something off about him. His eyes glowed in the darkness, and his limbs seemed too long, too twisted. And then, just as quickly as we saw him, he vanished into the desert night. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild. But as we continued down the road, things took a turn for the worse. We started hearing strange noises outside the car, scratching at the windows, whispers on the wind. Jake laughed it off, but I could tell he was nervous. I was too. And then, without warning, something slammed into the side of the car, sending us careening off the road and into the desert. The car flipped over, and everything went dark. When I came to, Jake was nowhere to be found. I stumbled out of the wreckage, calling out for him, but all I heard was the sound of my own voice echoing through the desert. I searched for hours, but there was no sign of him. That's when I saw it. The figure from before, standing on a nearby ridge, watching me with those glowing eyes. I knew then what we were dealing with: a Skinwalker, a creature of Navajo legend, able to take on the form of any animal or human it chooses. I didn't waste any time. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, hunting me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It took me days to make it back to civilization, days filled with fear and paranoia. And when I finally reached help, I told them everything about the Skinwalker, about Jake, about the nightmare that had become my reality. But no one believed me. They said it was just a trick of the desert, a figment of my imagination. But I know the truth. I know what I saw that night, and I'll never forget it. The desert may be vast and empty, but it's also home to things that lurk in the shadows, things that are better left undisturbed. And if you ever find yourself driving through the desert at night, remember one thing: beware the Skinwalker, for it is always watching, always waiting, and it will stop at nothing to claim its prey. Eighth story. I decided to spend a few nights at the famous Skinwalker Ranch. I found a diary. Now I need to get out. Fast. For context, I'm a real thrill seeker and a fan of anything horror-related. So as soon as I heard about Skinwalker Ranch, I jumped at the opportunity to spend a few nights there, see what's got people freaked out so much. I decided to make the trip. Since I live in New Mexico, I was looking at about a 3-hour trip to the ranch. I packed up my things and began the drive down. As soon as I arrived, I laughed. This is what everyone is shitting their pants about. It was just a small ranch, filled with farm animals and friendly people. I decided to check in. When I noticed I was the only visitor, everyone else was just a worker on this ranch or at the front desk. Weird, I thought, but shrugged it off. People will believe any tourist bullshit. That was the thought left in my head as I walked out to my cabin rental. I settled into the place at around 5 p.m. I was unopened the drawers to find a TV remote when I found the diary. What is this? I said to myself. I opened it up to reveal 3 entries dating back to about 20 years ago. I began to read. Day 1, July 16th, 2002, 7:38 p.m. I just arrived at the ranch, and I'll say it's not as terrifying as everyone makes it out to be. I figured I would use this journal to document my stay here. I'm going to be here for 5 days after all. May as well make some use out of it. Day 2, July 17th, 2002, 4:50 a.m. I just woke up to a loud bang. I sounded like it came from the roof of my cabin, but that's not possible since there are no trees near the cabin. It may have been a vulture. I'll check it out later. Day 2, July 17th, 2002, 3:03 p.m. I decided to check out the roof, but when I climbed up to it, there were no feathers or anything, just claw marks. I was freaked out, of course, but I dismissed it and thought they have probably been there for a while. Day 2, July 17th, 2002, 11:30 p.m. I was woken up yet again, except this time, I heard screams coming from outside, except they sounded off like something trying to sound human, but definitely not human. Day 3, July 18th, 2002, 8:05 p.m. They've come for me. The Skinwalkers. They're hungry. I've been hiding in my cabin since 7:30 when the screams and clawing at my door began. I don't know what to do, but whoever reads this, get out while you can. You won't survive here. I know I won't. The entries ended there. Holy shit, I said out loud. I was about to exit my cabin to show the front desk this and demand an explanation when I heard a high-pitched scream. That's when I realized. I'm too late. They're hungry. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.